The mountains don't forgive mistakes, and neither do men with something to hide. When Caleb Rourke found a woman bleeding out on a frozen trail, half dead and clutching documents that powerful men would kill for, he made a choice that would shatter his quiet life forever. She wasn't just a stranger, she was his promised bride. A woman who'd crossed an ocean only to discover that in 1875 America, some people were never meant to survive. This is their story, a story of survival, justice, and two damaged souls who refused to stay broken. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The dog found her first. Titan, 100 pounds of mountain cur with scars across his muzzle and one torn ear, stopped dead on the trail, hackles raised. Not the aggressive stance he took with wolves or the wary crouch he showed around strangers. This was different, urgent. Caleb Rourke lowered his rifle and watched the dog's behavior shift from alertness to something closer to distress. Titan whined, low and insistent, then bounded off the main path toward a cluster of rocks where the pines grew thick enough to block the afternoon sun. "What'd you find, boy?" Caleb's voice came out rough. He hadn't spoken to another human in 3 weeks. Better not be another porcupine. But Titan wasn't circling the way he did with prey. He was standing still, looking back, waiting for Caleb to follow. The wind cut through the trees with that particular bite that promised snow before nightfall. Late October in the Colorado Rockies didn't forgive hesitation. Caleb had learned that the hard way, same as he'd learned most things worth knowing, through pain and the kind of mistakes that left marks. He moved toward the rocks, boots crunching through frost-stiffened grass, and saw what had spooked his dog. A hand, small, delicate, fingers curled against the frozen ground. Jesus. Caleb dropped to his knees, rifle clattering against stone as he pushed through the underbrush. The woman was crumpled between two boulders like something discarded. Her dress, what was left of it, was torn in ways that made his jaw clench. Dark fabric, good quality once, now shredded and stained with blood that had frozen in patches against her skin. She wasn't moving. He pressed 2 fingers against her throat, barely breathing himself, and felt it. A pulse. Weak, irregular, but there. "Can you hear me?" He kept his voice level, the way he'd learned to do with injured animals. Panic was contagious. "I'm going to help you." No response. Her face was turned away, black hair matted with blood and dirt. Chinese, he realized. That complicated things in ways he didn't want to think about yet. Caleb worked quickly, checking for bleeding he could stop, bones that might be broken. Her left arm was twisted wrong, dislocated shoulder, maybe worse. Bruises darkened her throat in the unmistakable pattern of fingers. Someone had tried to strangle her. His hands stilled. This wasn't an accident, wasn't some greenhorn who'd wandered off a wagon trail and gotten lost. The tears in her dress were too deliberate, the bruises too purposeful. Someone had done this to her and left her here to die. Titan pressed against Caleb's leg, whimpering. The dog knew death when he smelled it, and this woman was close enough to taste it. "Not today," Caleb muttered. He shrugged off his coat, heavy wool that he'd need later but she needed now, and wrapped it around her carefully. She was small, maybe 5 feet if she stood up straight. Probably weighed less than the deer he'd carried down from the high country last week, but moving her wrong could kill her as surely as leaving her here. He slid one arm under her knees, the other supporting her back, and lifted. She made a sound, not quite conscious but aware enough to feel pain. Her head rolled against his shoulder and he got his first clear look at her face. Young. Couldn't be more than 25. Delicate features that would have been pretty if they weren't swollen and bruised. Split lip, dried blood crusted under her nose. Something fell from her dress as he stood. A leather document case, good quality, with brass fittings that caught the fading light. Caleb stared at it for a long moment, then made a decision he'd probably regret. He hooked it with one boot and dragged it close enough for Titan to grab. "Bring it." The dog took the case gently in his teeth. He'd been trained to retrieve without damaging, and followed as Caleb started the 2-mile trek back to his cabin. The woman didn't wake during the journey, which was probably a mercy. Every step jostled her injuries, and Caleb felt each small gasp and whimper like accusations. He should have brought the travois, should have taken time to stabilize her better, should have done a lot of things differently. Story of his life, really. The cabin came into view just as the sun touched the western peaks. One room, solid timber construction, chimney already sending up smoke from the fire he'd banked that morning. Not much, but it was tight against the weather and far enough from civilization that people left him alone. Usually, he kicked the door open and carried the woman inside, laying her on his bed, the only bed, with more care than he'd shown anything in recent memory. Titan dropped the document case by the door and went straight to his corner, settling with a heavy sigh that suggested he'd done his part and the rest was up to Caleb. "Thanks for nothing," Caleb said, but he scratched the dog's head as he passed. The fire had died down to coals. He built it back up, adding wood until heat filled the small space, then turned his attention to the woman. First thing, warmth. He piled every blanket he owned on top of her, then filled a pot with water and set it to heat. She was shivering now, which he took as a good sign. Dead people didn't shiver. Second thing, injuries. He'd learned field medicine during the war, the kind of brutal, practical knowledge that came from watching men die, and sometimes, if you were lucky and fast and the wound wasn't too bad, keeping them alive. He'd hated every minute of it, but the skills stuck. He cut away what was left of her dress with his hunting knife, keeping his eyes clinical, professional. Bruises covered her ribs, kicks, probably. The dislocated shoulder he'd spotted earlier, deep gash across her forehead that would need stitches, defensive wounds on her hands and forearms where she'd tried to fight back. She'd fought. That mattered. Caleb cleaned the wounds with whiskey and water, working by lamplight as the room grew darker. The head wound got 6 stitches, neat and tight. He'd done worse on himself with a mirror and stubbornness. The shoulder was trickier. He'd have to reduce it, pop it back into place, and that was going to hurt like hell even if she was unconscious. He positioned her flat on her back, took her arm at the wrist and elbow, and pulled steady and firm at a 45-degree angle while rotating outward. Her scream cut through the cabin like a knife. Caleb kept pulling, almost there. The joint resisted, then slipped back into place with a sound he felt more than heard. She went limp again, chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. "Sorry," he said quietly, knowing she couldn't hear. Had to be done. He fashioned a sling from a spare shirt, bound her ribs with strips of cloth, and covered her again. There wasn't much else he could do except wait and hope infection didn't set in. The woman's breathing evened out as the fire warmed the room. Caleb pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, suddenly aware of how tired he was. The adrenaline that had carried him through the last few hours was draining away, leaving behind the familiar ache in his bad leg and the deeper exhaustion that came from caring about something again. He'd gotten good at not caring. It was easier that way. His eyes fell on the document case by the door. Titan had dropped it carefully, no teeth marks in the leather. Good dog. Caleb retrieved it and sat back down, turning the case over in his hands. Expensive. Well made. The kind of thing that didn't belong on a mountain trail in the middle of nowhere. The clasps opened smoothly. Inside, protected by oilcloth wrapping, were papers. Official-looking papers with seals and signatures. He unfolded the first document, tilting it toward the lamplight. Certificate of Marriage Intent, San Francisco, California, September 15th, 1875. His own name stared back at him from the page, written in precise clerical script next to another name. Mei Lin Chen. Caleb's hands went numb. He'd sent that letter 9 months ago, drunk, lonely, angry at himself and the world, and the way his life had turned into something he didn't recognize. There was an agency in San Francisco that arranged marriages for frontier men, respectable women looking for new starts, men looking for companionship. He'd paid the fee, filled out the papers, and mostly forgotten about it. Until now. The woman in his bed, bleeding, broken, barely alive, was supposed to be his wife. He looked at her with new eyes, the stranger he'd pulled from the rocks. Mei Lin. The name felt foreign in his mind, syllables that didn't quite fit his understanding of the world. There were more papers, immigration documents, a letter of introduction written in careful English, and tucked between pages, a photograph, small, formal, the kind taken in a studio. A young woman in a high-collared dress, hair pinned up, looking directly at the camera with an expression that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't unfriendly either. It was her. Before whatever had happened. Caleb set the photograph on the table and kept reading. The letter of introduction was dated 6 weeks ago. She'd left San Francisco on October 1st, traveling by stage to Denver, and then by hired wagon toward the mountain territories. The letter explained, in English that was good but not native, that she was looking forward to meeting him, that she understood the arrangement, that she hoped they could build a good life together. She'd crossed an ocean for this, left everything she knew, and someone had tried to kill her. The implications settled over him like snow, cold and suffocating. She'd been traveling alone, a Chinese woman with papers that proved she had a right to be here. But in 1875 Colorado, papers didn't mean much if the wrong people decided they didn't. He'd heard stories. Everyone had. The Chinese Exclusion Act was being debated in Washington, newspapers full of ugly rhetoric about the yellow peril and jobs being stolen. Men had died, miners, railroad workers, people who'd committed no crime except being born somewhere else. A woman traveling alone would have been vulnerable in ways Caleb didn't want to imagine. The last document in the case was a map, hand-drawn but detailed, showing the route from Denver into the mountains. Someone had marked locations, towns, way stations, water sources. The trail ended at a spot labeled Rourke Cabin with a small X. She'd been close, maybe a day's ride from reaching him. Caleb folded the papers and put them back in the case, his movement slow and deliberate. His mind was working through scenarios, none of them good. Robbery seemed obvious, except her belongings were still with her. The document case alone was worth more than most thieves would leave behind. Attack of opportunity? Possible, but the injuries suggested something more personal, more deliberate. Or someone had targeted her specifically because of what she was, who she was, the papers she carried. That thought made something cold settle in his gut. Titan raised his head, ears pricked. A moment later, Caleb heard it too. Horses. Multiple riders coming up the trail from the valley. His hand went to the rifle propped by the door. Visitors were rare. Visitors after dark were trouble. He moved to the window, staying to the side where he couldn't be seen, and peered out through the gap in the shutters. 3 riders, moving slow, picking their way up the rocky trail. They'd have seen his smoke, knew someone was home. Could be innocent, travelers looking for shelter, maybe. But Caleb's instincts, the ones that had kept him alive through 4 years of war and 10 years of harder peace, were screaming otherwise. He checked the rifle's load, then his pistol, then positioned himself where he could see both the door and the bed. If they were looking for the woman, they'd have to go through him. The riders stopped 50 yards from the cabin, close enough to be seen, far enough to retreat quickly if things went bad. Smart. One of them called out, "Hello, the cabin!" Caleb didn't answer. "We're looking for someone. Chinese woman, traveling alone. You seen anyone like that?" His finger tightened on the rifle. "No." "You sure about that? We tracked her this direction. Her horse came back without her." "Haven't seen anyone." Caleb's voice was flat, emotionless. "Been hunting. Just got back." A pause. The riders conferred, voices too low to make out words. Then the same voice, harder now. "Mind if we look around? Won't take but a minute." "I mind." "Now that's not very neighborly." "Don't recall inviting you to be neighbors." Another pause. Longer this time. Caleb watched through the window gap, reading their body language. They were armed. He could see rifle butts and saddle scabbards. The way they sat their horses suggested men comfortable with violence. "There's a reward," the voice said, changing tactics. "Woman's traveling with stolen property, documents that don't belong to her. Anyone who helps return her, there's good money in it." Stolen property. That was interesting. "Like I said, haven't seen her." "Your dog's going crazy in there." True. Titan was on his feet now, growling low in his chest. Dogs don't act like that for no reason. He doesn't like strangers. "We could come back with the law, make this official." Caleb smiled without humor. "Nearest law is 3 days' ride. You do that. I'll wait." The threat hung in this cold air between them. They were sizing him up, trying to decide if he was worth the trouble. Caleb let them see the rifle, let them understand exactly what kind of trouble they'd be buying. Finally, the lead rider spoke again. "You remember this conversation if that woman turns up. She's dangerous. Killed a man in Denver." "I'll keep that in mind." They left slowly, making a show of reluctance, but they left. Caleb watched until they were out of sight, then kept watching for another 20 minutes. The smart move would be to circle back, wait, see if he'd been lying. He'd done it himself, more than once. When he was reasonably sure they were gone, he turned back to the cabin. Mei Lin hadn't moved, but her breathing had changed, shallower, faster. Fever, probably. The body's response to trauma and infection. Caleb dampened a cloth and pressed it to her forehead. Her skin was hot to the touch, dry. Not good. "You're causing me a lot of trouble," he said quietly. "Hope you're worth it." She didn't answer, lost somewhere in fever dreams that made her twitch and mumble in a language he didn't understand. He pulled the chair closer and settled in to wait. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and whistling through gaps in the timber. The first snow of the season was coming. He could smell it in the air. The riders would be back. Maybe with more men, maybe with an actual badge, though he doubted it. The story about stolen property and murder was convenient, the kind of lie that gave bad men permission to do bad things. Caleb looked at the woman, at Mei Lin, and felt something shift in his chest, a decision crystallizing. He'd spent 10 years running from who he used to be, from the war, from the things he'd done, from the man who'd cared about causes and principles and the difference between right and wrong. That man had gotten people killed. But sitting here, looking at this stranger who'd traveled halfway around the world on the strength of a promise, who'd been beaten and left to die because she'd had the audacity to believe papers could protect her. Maybe that man wasn't as dead as he'd thought. "All right," he said to the unconscious woman. "We'll figure this out." It wasn't much of a promise, but it was more than he'd offered anyone in a long time. The fever broke 3 days later. Caleb was dozing in the chair, rifle across his lap, when he heard her voice. Weak, confused, but conscious. "Water." He jerked awake, hand going to the rifle before his brain caught up. The woman, Mei Lin, was looking at him with dark eyes that held more awareness than they should have after what she'd been through. He poured water from the pitcher, supported her head with one hand while she drank. She took small sips, controlled, and when she'd had enough, she pulled back with a slight nod. "Thank you." Her English was clear, only slightly accented, better than his Chinese, which was non-existent. "How do you feel?" She considered the question seriously, taking inventory of her injuries with the kind of careful attention that suggested she'd done this before. "Alive, surprisingly." It was close. "How long?" 3 days. You've been feverish most of it." Mei Lin tried to sit up, gasped at the pain in her ribs, and fell back against the pillows. Caleb didn't move to help. She needed to learn her limits on her own. After a moment, she spoke again. "Where am I?" "My cabin, about 2 miles from where I found you." "And you are?" "Caleb Rourke." Something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe relief, hard to tell. "The man I came to find." "That would be me. I thought—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "The letter said you lived alone. I expected someone older." Caleb almost smiled. Disappointed? Surprised. Her eyes moved around the cabin, taking in details with the same careful attention she'd given her injuries. One room, sparse furniture, weapons, no personal touches except the dog sleeping by the fire. "You live very simply." "Simplicity suits me. And you saved me. That doesn't seem simple. Couldn't exactly leave you there." Many men would have. She said it matter-of-factly, without bitterness. A statement of observed truth. Caleb didn't argue because she was right. Mei Lin was quiet for a moment, and he could see her gathering strength for the next question. The important one. "The men who attacked me, did they— came here 3 days ago looking for you. I told them I hadn't seen anyone." "They didn't believe you." "No, but they left anyway. They'll come back." "I know." She looked at him directly, and Caleb was struck by the intelligence in her eyes. This wasn't some delicate flower who'd wilted at the first sign of trouble. This was someone who'd taken a beating and was already calculating next moves. "Why?" she asked. "You don't know me. The arrangement between us—" She gestured weakly at the document case, which Caleb had left on the table. "It's legal, but you're not obligated. You could have given me to them." "Could have. But you didn't. I want to know why." Caleb considered several answers, because it was the right thing to do. Because he'd made a promise, even if it was a drunk and stupid promise. Because seeing her beaten and discarded had woken something in him that he thought was long dead. Instead, he said, "They told me you killed a man in Denver, stole documents that didn't belong to you. Maylin's expression didn't change. And you believe them? No. Why not? Because liars have tells, and they were lying. She smiled, just a little, and winced at the pull on her split lip. You're observant. I pay attention. That's rare. So I've been told. Another silence, more comfortable this time. Outside, Titan barked once, his alert bark, not his threat bark. Probably a deer passing by. The dog had learned to announce visitors of all kinds. I need to tell you something, Maylin said. About what happened. About why those men want me. You don't have to. Yes, I do. She struggled to sit up again, and this time Caleb helped, adjusting pillows behind her back. You deserve to know what you're protecting. I'm listening. Maylin took a breath, organized her thoughts, and began. When I left San Francisco, I was carrying documents. Legal documents, immigration papers, the marriage certificate you saw, letters of introduction, everything I needed to prove I had a right to be here. She paused. But I was also carrying something else. Information. Caleb waited. There's a network, she continued. Men in San Francisco, Denver, other cities. They bring Chinese workers to America with promises of good wages, fair treatment, opportunity. But when the workers arrive, the promises disappear. The contracts they signed aren't work agreements, they're debt bondage. The workers are trapped, forced to pay impossible fees for their passage, their housing, their food. They can't leave, can't complain, can't get help because they don't speak English and they don't know American law. Slavery, Caleb said flatly. Not officially. Officially, it's all legal, contracts signed willingly, debts legitimately owed. But yes, slavery in everything but name. And you have proof of this. I had proof. Names, dates, amounts. Documentation of bribes paid to immigration officials. Lists of workers who disappeared when they tried to escape. Her voice hardened. I was going to bring it to the federal authorities. Show them what was happening. Was? Maylin gestured at herself, at the visible evidence of what had happened to her. I made it as far as the mountain pass. The men who attacked me took everything. The documents, the lists, all of it. They burned it in front of me before they... She stopped, swallowed hard. Before they decided to make sure I couldn't testify about what I knew. Caleb felt his jaw clench. They left you for dead. Yes. But they didn't check your body. Didn't look for this. He nodded toward the document case on the table. I had hidden it earlier, when I realized I was being followed. Put the personal documents in the case and buried it near the trail. A bitter smile. They were so sure they'd taken everything, so convinced that a woman, especially a Chinese woman, couldn't possibly outsmart them. Their mistake. It won't save those workers. Without the evidence, but it saves you, Caleb interrupted. Proves you have a legal right to be here. That you're under my protection, if we're following through with the marriage arrangement. Maylin looked at him carefully. Is that what you want? A real marriage, not just the legal paperwork? I don't know what I want, Caleb admitted, but I know those men can't have you. And I know the story you just told me. That's the kind of story that needs telling, even without the documentation to back it up. People won't believe me. A Chinese woman accusing prominent businessmen, they'll say I'm lying, that I'm bitter, that I'm... Then we make them believe you. Caleb stood, pacing the small cabin with restless energy. This network you're talking about, it doesn't just operate in shadows. It needs infrastructure, lawyers, accountants, officials who look the other way. That kind of operation leaves tracks. You sound like you've done this before. I've hunted men before. Same principle. Maylin was quiet for a moment, studying him. You're not what I expected, Caleb Rourke. Yeah, well, you're not exactly what I pictured either when I sent that letter. What did you picture? He considered. Someone quiet, obedient, someone who'd be content with a simple life in the mountains. I can be quiet, Maylin said. Obedience is negotiable, and contentment... She touched her injured ribs gently. I think contentment might take some time. That's fair. Titan raised his head, ears swiveling. A moment later, Caleb heard it too. The sound of horses, multiple riders, coming up the trail. Maylin saw his expression change. They're back. Sounds like it. He moved to the window, checked outside. 6 riders this time, moving in formation like men who knew what they were doing, professional. more of them than before. I should hide, or you should turn me over. This isn't your fight. You're in my cabin. That makes it my fight. Caleb checked his rifle, his pistol, counted ammunition. Not enough for a prolonged battle, but enough to make a point. Can you shoot? I grew up in a port city during a rebellion. Yes, I can shoot. Good. He handed her his spare pistol, watched her check the cylinder with practiced efficiency. Definitely not what he'd expected. Stay in bed, look helpless. If they get past me, you know what to do. Caleb, I'm not giving you to them. He said it simply, a statement of fact. So let's see what they really want. The riders stopped in front of the cabin, closer this time, bolder. The lead man, different from before, dismounted and walked right up to the door. Caleb Rourke, that's me. Name's Tate, working for the Pacific Labor Company out of San Francisco. We're looking for a fugitive, Chinese woman, traveling under false documents. We have reason to believe she's here, and I have reason to believe you're trespassing. This is official business. Show me a badge and I'll consider it official. Through the gap in the shutters, Caleb saw Tate's expression harden. Don't need a badge to recover stolen property. She's not property. So you admit she's here? Caleb smiled. I admit nothing. But let's say hypothetically there was a woman in my cabin. Let's say she had legal documents proving she had every right to be in this country and that she was traveling to meet her intended husband, me. What's your move then? Tate glanced back at his men, a quick calculation. Those documents could be forged. Could be. Could also be genuine. Seems like the kind of thing a court should decide, not 6 men with guns on a mountain trail. We're not leaving without her. Then I guess we have a problem. The standoff held for a long moment. Caleb could feel Mei Lin's eyes on his back, could sense her fear mixing with something else. Hope, maybe? Or just the desperate need to believe someone would stand between her and the men who'd tried to kill her. Tate made his decision. Burn him out. The woman too, if she won't come quietly. The men moved fast, spreading out to surround the cabin. Professional indeed. Caleb had maybe 30 seconds before they started shooting. He turned to Mei Lin. Can you move? If I have to. You have to. He grabbed blankets, his pack, stuffed in ammunition and supplies with practiced speed. Back door. There's a game trail that leads to the high rocks. You go first, I'll cover. You'll be killed. Not if you move fast enough to make it worth my while. She didn't argue further, just wrapped herself in a blanket and stumbled toward the back of the cabin. Caleb waited until she was clear, then grabbed a jar of kerosene he'd been saving for lamps. If they wanted fire, he'd give them fire. He splashed kerosene across the front wall, soaked the door, then lit a match and tossed it as he dove out the back. The cabin went up fast. Dry timber, good draft, all his possessions feeding the flames. Caleb didn't look back. He caught up with Mei Lin on the trail, supported her weight as they climbed, and heard the confused shouts behind them as Tate's men realized their quarry had escaped. You burned your own home, Mei Lin gasped. It's just a building. Your things can be replaced. They climbed higher, following a trail only Caleb and the mountain goats knew. Behind them, gunshots echoed off the rocks. Warning shots, probably. The men couldn't see them in the darkness and smoke. An hour later, they reached the high rocks. A small cave, barely big enough for 2 people and a dog, but defensible. Caleb built a small fire in the back where the smoke would dissipate through cracks in the stone, then checked Mei Lin's injuries. She was shaking, shock, pain, exhaustion, take your pick. But her eyes were still sharp, still aware. What now? She asked. Caleb looked out at the burning cabin below, the distant shapes of men searching the darkness, and felt something settle in his chest. A decision made, a line crossed. Now we fight back. Mei Lin smiled, fierce, determined, nothing delicate about it. Good. And Titan, lying between them, thumped his tail once in agreement. The cave smelled like wet stone and old smoke. Caleb kept the fire small, just enough to keep Mei Lin from going into shock, while Titan lay at the entrance with his ears pitched forward, listening to the night. Below them, the cabin was still burning. Orange light flickered against the trees, and occasionally the wind carried voices, angry, frustrated voices of men who'd lost their quarry. Mei Lin sat with her back against the cave wall, the blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. She hadn't said much since they'd stopped running, just watched Caleb work with that same careful attention she gave everything. "They'll search all night," she said finally. "Probably. And when they don't find us, they'll widen the search. Bring more men." Caleb poked at the fire with a stick, not looking at her. "How many people are involved in this network you mentioned?" "I don't know exactly. The documents I had listed 17 names, businessmen, shipping agents, 2 immigration officials. But there were references to others. The operation was bigger than what I could prove." "And the Pacific Labor Company, that's a real business?" "Real enough. They have offices in San Francisco, Sacramento, Denver. On paper, they're legitimate. Labor recruitment, contract negotiations, all legal." She shifted, winced at the pain in her ribs. "But the contracts are designed to trap people. The debt keeps growing. There's always another fee, another charge. Workers can't pay it off." Caleb had seen similar schemes during the war. Sutlers who charged soldiers triple for supplies kept them in permanent debt to the company's store. Different context, same cruelty. "So why you?" he asked. "Why would someone inside the operation help you gather evidence?" Mei Lin was quiet for a moment, and he could see her deciding how much to tell him. "My brother," she said finally. "He came to America 5 years ago. The Pacific Labor Company sponsored his immigration, promised him work on the railroads. Good wages, he could send money home to our family in Guangdong." Her voice went flat. "He sent 1 letter, then nothing." "You think he's still alive?" "I don't know. The company says he broke his contract and disappeared, but I found his name on a different list. Workers who died in accidents that were never reported. Cave-ins, explosions, things that should have been investigated but weren't." Jesus. "The evidence I was carrying would have proven it. Shown that the company was hiding deaths to avoid paying compensation, to keep recruiting new workers without anyone knowing how many men they'd already killed." She looked at him directly. "That's why they wanted me dead. Not just to protect their business, but to protect themselves from murder charges." Caleb absorbed that, turning it over in his mind. This wasn't just about labor exploitation anymore. This was conspiracy, fraud, possibly dozens of deaths covered up over years. "The man you were bringing the evidence to," he said, "in Denver. Who was he, though?" "Federal prosecutor. His name was in the newspaper. He'd been investigating corruption in the territorial government. I thought if anyone would listen to a Chinese woman making accusations against powerful men, it might be him." "You ever meet him? Confirm he'd actually take the case?" "No. I wrote him a letter explaining what I had, but I left San Francisco before I received a reply. I couldn't wait. The company was getting suspicious. People who asked too many questions were disappearing." Caleb thought about that. A prosecutor who might or might not be willing to help, evidence that had been destroyed, and a woman whose testimony would be questioned simply because of who she was. Not exactly a strong position, but not hopeless either. "How'd you get the original documents?" he asked. "If the company was so careful about covering their tracks." A ghost of a smile crossed Mei Lin's face. "I worked for them, as a translator and clerk in their San Francisco office. They thought because I was a woman and Chinese, I wouldn't understand what the documents really meant, or wouldn't care. They were wrong. Very wrong." The smile faded. "When I started noticing discrepancies, workers listed as employed who I knew had died, payments recorded for wages that were never distributed, I began making copies. Just a page here, a ledger entry there, nothing that would be missed immediately. And when they figured out what you were doing, I ran. Took everything I'd gathered and left in the middle of the night." She pulled the blanket tighter. "I thought if I could get to Denver, to someone with authority who would listen, I could stop them, protect the workers still trapped in the system." "Noble plan." "Stupid plan," she corrected. "I underestimated how far they'd go to silence me. I thought—" She stopped, looked away. "I thought because we were in America, because there were laws, that would mean something, that I'd be protected." Caleb didn't point out how naive that was. She'd already learned that lesson the hard way. Titan's growl cut through the cave, low and warning. Caleb was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, moving to the entrance. The dog's attention was fixed on something downslope, body tense. "What is it?" Mei Lin whispered. "Don't know. Stay back." The night was dark, moon hidden behind clouds that promised more snow. Caleb strained his eyes and ears, trying to pick out whatever had spooked the dog. Movement, maybe? Or just the wind through the trees? Then he saw it, a flash of light. Someone with a lantern moving through the burned remains of the cabin, searching. "They're still down there," he said quietly. "How many?" "Can't tell. At least 2, maybe more." Mei Lin joined him at the cave mouth, moving carefully despite her injuries. She looked down at the distant lights, her expression unreadable. "They won't give up," she said. "Even if we escape tonight, they'll keep hunting. The information I have, what I know, it's too dangerous to them." "Then we need to make it more dangerous for them to keep hunting than to let you go." "How?" Caleb thought about it, watching the lights move through the wreckage below. "You said the prosecutor in Denver might be sympathetic. What about the press? Newspapers? What about them? Companies like the Pacific Labor Company, they survive on reputation, contracts with the government, relationships with other businesses. Bad publicity could hurt them worse than a single prosecution." He turned to look at her. "Especially if the story involves attempted murder. A woman left for dead, men burning down a cabin to cover their tracks." Mei Lin's eyes widened slightly. "You want to make this public. I want to make it impossible for them to quietly make you disappear. Once your story is out there, once people know your name and what happened to you, they can't touch you without proving everything you've said is true. It could backfire. The newspapers might not believe me, or they might print a version that makes me look like the criminal." "Possible," Caleb admitted, "but right now they're hunting you in the dark, and nobody knows you exist. Change that dynamic, you change the game." She considered this, and he could see her mind working through angles and risks. Smart woman. Probably smarter than him if he was being honest. "We'd need to get to Denver first," she said, "and we'd need proof that the attack happened. Something more than just my word. We've got the burned cabin. We've got your injuries, which any doctor can document. We've got the document case with your legal papers proving who you are and why you were traveling." Caleb gestured down at the lights. "And if we're lucky, we might be able to grab one of those men down there. Get him to talk." "That's a lot of ifs." "You have a better plan?" Mei Lin smiled, sharp and bitter. "No, but I'm getting used to plans that involve running for my life." Titan's growl intensified. The lights below were moving, spreading out in a search pattern. They'd be working their way up the mountain soon, checking every trail and hiding spot. "We can't stay here," Caleb said. "Need to move before they widen the perimeter." "I can't run, not like before." "Then we don't run. We find somewhere we can defend, hole up until morning, and figure out our next move when we can actually see what we're doing." He gathered their few supplies, blankets, ammunition, the document case, and helped Mei Lin to her feet. She was steady enough, but he could see the toll the last few hours had taken. The woman needed rest, medical attention, and about a month of safety to recover. Instead, she was about to spend the night hiding in the mountains with men hunting her. They moved slowly, following a deer trail that wound higher into the rocks. Titan ranged ahead, his dark shape barely visible against the darker night. The dog knew these mountains as well as Caleb did, could find paths that men would miss. "Tell me about the men who attacked you," Caleb said quietly as they walked. "The ones before Tate and his crew showed up. You remember any details?" "4 of them. They'd been following me for 2 days before they made their move. Waited until I was in the mountain pass, away from any settlements." Mei Lin's voice was steady, clinical, but he could hear the tension underneath. The leader was tall, had a scar across his left cheek, called himself Morrison. "He say what he wanted?" "The documents. He knew exactly what I was carrying, not just the marriage papers, but the evidence. He asked very specific questions about names, dates, locations." She paused. "They didn't just want to stop me from talking, they wanted to know what I'd already told others." That was interesting and concerning. "What'd you tell them?" "Nothing useful. I said I'd sent copies to a lawyer in San Francisco, which wasn't true, but it seemed to worry them." A harsh laugh. "Not that it saved me. Once they had the documents and burned them, Morrison said it didn't matter what I'd told anyone. Without proof, I was just another immigrant with delusions." "And then they tried to kill you." Morrison gave the order. The others, they seemed uncomfortable with it. One of them argued that it wasn't necessary, that they could just leave me stranded without supplies. But Morrison said loose ends were how operations got exposed. Her voice went quiet. "He put his hands around my throat and squeezed until I passed out. I woke up in the rocks where you found me." Caleb felt his jaw clench. He'd seen a lot of cruelty during the war, but there was something particularly cold about Morrison's calculation. Not killing in the heat of battle or even in rage, but as a simple business decision. You'd recognize him if you saw him again? Yes. Good, because men like that, they get overconfident, start thinking they're untouchable. He helped her over a fallen log. We make enough noise, 'cause enough trouble, eventually he'll make a mistake. And if he doesn't, then I'll make one for him. They climbed in silence for a while, the only sounds their breathing and the occasional skitter of rocks under their feet. Behind them, the lights from the searchers had grown more distant, but Caleb knew that was temporary. By morning, Tate would have expanded the search, brought in more men, maybe even dogs of their own. The cave Caleb was aiming for was another hour's hike, a deeper shelter with multiple exits and a spring for water. He'd used it once before, years ago, when he'd been the one running from trouble. Different circumstances, same desperation. Can I ask you something? Maylin said. Shoot. When you sent the letter to the marriage agency, what were you hoping for? Caleb didn't answer right away. It was a fair question, and she deserved an honest answer, but that required examining motivations he'd been avoiding for months. Company, I guess, he said finally. Someone to talk to besides the dog. Maybe help with the work, cooking, mending, practical things. That's all? What else would there be? Most men who arrange marriages are looking for a family, children, a future. I'm not most men, I noticed. There was something in her voice he couldn't quite read. What did you do before you came to the mountains? Soldier, then scout, then nothing in particular. You're being evasive. I'm being private. There's a difference. Maylin let it drop, but he could feel her attention on him, measuring and assessing. She was trying to figure him out, same as he was trying to figure her out. Two strangers bound together by circumstances neither had chosen, trying to decide if they could trust each other with more than just their immediate survival. Titan barked once, his all-clear signal. They'd reached the second cave. It was bigger than the first, carved deeper into the mountain by centuries of water and wind. The entrance was narrow enough to defend, the interior spacious enough to move around. Caleb built another small fire in a natural chimney that vented the smoke up through cracks in the stone. Maylin sat heavily, and he could see the exhaustion catching up with her. Rest, he said. I'll keep watch. You need to sleep too. I'll sleep when we're safe. That might be a while. Then I'll sleep in a while. She didn't argue, just wrapped herself in the blanket and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into sleep, or unconsciousness, hard to tell which. Caleb sat at the cave entrance with his rifle across his knees and watched the night. His cabin was gone. His supplies were ash. He'd thrown away 10 years of careful isolation for a woman he'd known for less than a week. Stupid, reckless, exactly the kind of decision he'd sworn he'd never make again. But as he sat there in the cold, listening to Maylene's breathing and Titan's quiet snores, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Morning came gray and bitter. Snow had started falling during the night, not heavy yet, but enough to cover their tracks. Caleb woke Maylin with a touch on her shoulder, watched her come awake fast and tense, hands already moving toward the pistol he'd left beside her. Easy, he said. Just me. She relaxed fractionally. I know, but we're still clear. Maylin sat up, moving stiffly. Her face was pale, dark circles under her eyes, but her voice was steady when she spoke. What's the plan? We need to get to Denver, but Tate and his men will be watching the main trails, expecting us to run. Caleb had been thinking about this all night. There's another route, longer, harder, goes through the high passes. Won't be pleasant with winter coming on, but it'll get us there. How long? Week, maybe more. Depends on the weather and how fast you can move. I can move fast enough. He didn't argue, just handed her a piece of dried meat from his pack. Not much, but it was food. They'd need to hunt along the way, supplement what little supplies he'd managed to grab. There's something else we need to discuss, Maylin said after a moment. The marriage arrangement. We don't have to go through with it. Once we reach Denver, once I can testify about what I know, you're free of any obligation. Caleb looked at her. This woman who'd crossed an ocean on the strength of a promise, who'd been beaten and left for dead, who was sitting in a freezing cave planning her next move instead of giving up. The arrangement stands, he said. At least legally. Gives you more protection. Gives me more standing to speak on your behalf. After that, he shrugged. We can figure it out. That's not very romantic. Never claimed to be romantic. Good. I don't need romance. I need survival. That I can help with. They gathered their things and left the cave as the sun was rising, weak light filtering through snow clouds. Titan led the way, nose to the ground, following scents only he could detect. The trail Caleb chose was treacherous. Narrow paths along cliff edges, steep climbs through loose scree. Maylin kept up without complaint, though he could see each step cost her. The ribs were still healing, the shoulder tender, and the altitude made breathing harder. By midday, they'd put 5 miles between themselves and the cabin. The snow was falling harder now, reducing visibility to a few dozen yards. Good for hiding their trail, bad for everything else. We need to find shelter before nightfall, Caleb said. There's an old trapper's shack another few miles north. If it's still standing, we can hole up there. And if someone's already using it, then we convince them to share. The shack was still standing, barely. One wall had partially collapsed and the roof sagged dangerously, but it was better than being exposed to the weather. Caleb checked for occupants, found only mouse droppings and old leaves, and declared it safe enough. They spent the afternoon reinforcing the structure with deadfall and pine branches, creating a windbreak that would keep the worst of the cold out. Mei Lin worked alongside him despite her injuries, and he found himself grudgingly impressed by her determination. You've done this before, he observed. Survival work. Guangdong province isn't gentle. If you couldn't work, you didn't eat. She tied off a branch with practiced efficiency. My father was a fisherman. I learned young that nature doesn't care about your comfort. Smart man, your father. He is, I don't know. Her hands stilled. I haven't had a letter from home in 2 years. The last one mentioned illness spreading through the village. After that, silence. Caleb didn't offer empty comfort. Loss was loss, and pretty words wouldn't change it. They finished the repairs as darkness fell, then built a small fire in the shack's old hearth. The chimney was mostly intact, drawing smoke up and out, and soon the small space was almost warm. Tell me about the war, Mei Lin said suddenly. Caleb looked at her, surprised. Why? Because you move like a soldier, fight like one, and I want to know who I'm trusting with my life. Fair enough. I was cavalry. Fought for the Union, mostly in Missouri and Kansas. 4 years of mud, blood, and stupidity. He poked at the fire. Lost my taste for causes somewhere around year 3. What happened? The usual. Men died. Good men, mostly, while bastards on both sides got promoted for ordering them into the meat grinder. His voice was flat, emotionless. By the end, I couldn't remember what we were fighting for, just that we were supposed to keep fighting. But you survived. Physically. He met her eyes. The rest of me took longer to put back together. Still working on it. Mei Lin nodded slowly. The scars people can't see are harder to heal than the ones they can. Speaking from experience, my brother wasn't the only family member who came to America. I had an uncle who went to the gold fields in California back in the 50s. He sent letters for a year, excited, hopeful, talking about the fortune he'd make. Then the letters changed. He'd been attacked, called names I won't repeat, driven from claims he'd legally purchased. She stared into the fire. His last letter said he was coming home. He never arrived. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry, but sorry doesn't change anything. She looked at him. That's why I want to expose the Pacific Labor Company. Not just for my brother, but for all the others who believed America was different, who thought laws and papers would protect them. And you still believe that? After what they did to you? I believe some laws work for some people. And I believe if enough people know what's happening, the pressure to enforce those laws becomes too great to ignore. Her expression hardened. I'm not naive enough to think justice is guaranteed, but I'm stubborn enough to fight for it anyway. Caleb found himself smiling despite everything. You know, when I sent that letter to the marriage agency, I was expecting someone quiet and agreeable. Disappointed? Terrified, he admitted. You're going to get me killed. Probably. Worth it, though. We'll see. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to coals. Outside, the wind howled through the trees and snow piled against the walls. Tomorrow they'd start the real journey, the hard push through the mountains toward Denver and whatever waited for them there. But tonight, in this moment, they were alive and together and still fighting. That was enough. Titan's sudden bark shattered the peace. The dog was on his feet, staring at the door, every hair on his body standing straight. Caleb grabbed his rifle. Someone's out there. How many? Don't know. Titan, quiet. The dog fell silent but didn't relax. Through the gaps in the shack's walls, Caleb could see movement, shapes in the snow circling the structure. Come out, Rourke! Tate's voice cut through the wind. We just want to talk. Talking doesn't usually require guns, Caleb called back. And hiding doesn't usually indicate innocence. Send the woman out. We'll leave you in peace. Maylin had the pistol in her hand, crouched behind the partial wall. Her eyes met Caleb's, and he saw the question there. He shook his head. Not a chance. She's under my protection, he shouted. That's not changing. Then you're making a mistake. Won't be my first. A pause, then. Morrison wants her alive. You cooperate. You both walk away from this. Morrison. The man who'd tried to strangle Maylin and left her for dead. That's interesting, Caleb called. Thought he already tried to kill her once. Another pause, longer this time. When Tate spoke again, his voice had changed, less certain. There's been a misunderstanding. Morrison wants to clear things up. By sending armed men in a snowstorm, real diplomatic. Maylin touched his arm. They're stalling, she whispered, keeping us talking while they get into position. She was right. Through the wall gaps, Caleb could see the shapes moving closer, spreading out to cover all angles. Last chance, Rourke. The woman comes out or we come in. Caleb looked around the shack, one partial wall, a sagging roof, nowhere to run. They were pinned down, outnumbered, and low on ammunition. Should have picked a better defensive position, should have kept moving, should have done a lot of things differently. But dwelling on should-haves wouldn't keep them alive. All right, he shouted. Give me a minute to talk to her. You've got 30 seconds. Caleb turned to Maylin, speaking fast and low. There's a gap in the back wall, behind where the chimney collapsed. You can fit through, I can't. Take Titan, head north until you hit the creek, then follow it downstream. There's a settlement about 10 miles. Ask for a man named Fletcher. Tell him I sent you. And you? I'll keep them busy. That's suicide. That's buying you time. He pressed the document case into her hands. Get to Denver. Tell your story. Make sure these bastards don't win. Caleb, time's up, Rourke. Tate's shout was closer now. Maylin looked at him, and for a moment he thought she'd argue. Instead, she grabbed his face with both hands and kissed him, hard, desperate, a promise and goodbye rolled into one. Then she was moving, squeezing through the gap, Titan following reluctantly. The dog looked back once, whined softly, then disappeared into the snow with her. Caleb turned to face the door, rifle ready, and waited. When they came through, he'd make every shot count. The door exploded inward with a crack of splintering wood. Caleb fired twice before the first man cleared the threshold, saw him drop, then rolled left as return fire chewed through the spot where he'd been standing. 3 more came through fast, professional, spreading out to avoid bunching up. Caleb put a round through the shoulder of the nearest one, heard him scream and go down, then the rifle clicked empty. He dropped it and drew his pistol as hands grabbed him from behind. Someone had come through the back wall, the same gap Maylin had used. Smart. Caleb drove his elbow back, felt it connect with ribs, twisted, and brought the pistol up. The man blocking his line of fire caught the bullet meant for someone else, went down clutching his chest. Then something hard cracked against the back of his skull, and the world tilted sideways. He woke to pain and the smell of smoke. His hands were bound behind him, rope cutting into his wrists. Blood ran down his face from the head wound, warm and sticky, dripping onto the shack's dirt floor. Tate stood over him, face tight with anger. 2 of his men were down, dead or dying, Caleb couldn't tell which. The others were searching the shack, tearing through what little was left. Where is she? Tate's voice was controlled, but barely. Caleb spat blood. Gone. I can see that. Where? Didn't ask. Figured she'd tell me when she was ready. Tate hit him, a measured blow to the ribs that drove the air from Caleb's lungs. Professional. The man knew how to hurt someone without killing them too quickly. Let's try again. The woman, the dog. Which direction? North, south, east, west. Caleb grinned through bloody teeth. Pick one. Another hit. Same spot. Something cracked. Rib, probably. You're protecting a criminal, a thief who stole proprietary documents and killed a company agent in San Francisco. That's a new one. Thought she just stole documents. Tate's expression flickered, just for a moment, but Caleb caught it. The story was evolving, getting worse with each telling. They were building a narrative, manufacturing justification for whatever they planned to do. The truth will come out, Tate said. Better for you if you cooperate now. Truth already came out. Your man Morrison tried to strangle her and left her for dead. Everything else is just covering that up. Morrison was defending himself from an armed fugitive. Morrison's a murderer. You're just helping him avoid consequences. Tate hit him again, harder this time. Caleb tasted copper, felt his vision blur. The head wound wasn't helping, probably a concussion on top of everything else. Last chance. Tell me where she went and maybe I let you live. Maybe isn't good enough. Then you're a fool. Been called worse. Tate stepped back, nodded to one of his men. Burn it, him too. They doused the shack with lamp oil, working quickly and efficiently. Caleb watched through eyes that wouldn't quite focus, trying to calculate odds that kept coming up zero. His hands were bound, his weapons gone, and even if he got free, where would he run? The snow was still falling, temperatures dropping, and he had no supplies. Mei Lin had maybe an hour's head start, less if Tate sent men after her immediately. Not enough time to reach Fletcher's settlement, but enough to find cover if she moved smart. The dog would help. Titan knew these mountains could find shelter and game trails even in a blizzard. She'd survive. Had to believe that, or dying here meant nothing. One of Tate's men lit a torch and touched it to the oil-soaked wall. Flames spread fast, hungry, filling the shack with heat and smoke. Anything you want to say? Tate asked. Caleb looked him in the eye. Yeah, you're making a mistake. How's that? Killing me makes this personal. Right now you're just following orders, doing a job. But you burn me alive, that's different. That's the kind of thing that follows a man. I'll manage. But Tate's voice had lost some of its certainty. Will you? Caleb let the question hang. Because when Mei Lin tells her story, and she will tell it, this moment comes up. The time you murdered an unarmed man in cold blood. Think prosecutors won't care about that? Think juries won't? She's a Chinese woman accusing American businessmen. Who's going to believe her? Enough people. Especially when there's a body to back up her claims. The flames were closer now, heat scorching Caleb's skin. Smoke filled his lungs, made breathing painful, but he kept talking, kept pressing. You ever hear about the Sand Creek Massacre? Chivington thought he could kill a village of Cheyenne, call them hostiles, and nobody would question it. Know what happened? Congress investigated. Officers were disgraced. The truth came out anyway. Ancient history. Recent history. 10 years ago. People remember. Caleb coughed, fighting for air. Your bosses are paying you to clean up their mess. But who cleans up the mess when you're the story everyone's talking about? Tate's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he just stared at Caleb while the fire spread and his men shifted uncomfortably. Finally, he spoke. Cut him loose. We're taking him with us. Sir? One of the men looked confused. Morrison said, Morrison's not here. Cut him loose. They dragged Caleb out of the burning shack, threw him face down in the snow. The cold was shocking after the heat, almost painful. Someone cut the ropes on his wrists, and blood rushed back into his hands with pins and needles. Tate crouched beside him. You bought yourself maybe 12 hours. Morrison wants you dead, and he'll get his wish. But not here, not like this. He stood. Consider it professional courtesy, soldier to soldier. Wasn't a soldier, Caleb managed, was cavalry. Same difference. They left him there in the snow, took their wounded, and disappeared into the storm. Caleb lay still for a long time, listening to the hoofbeats fade, making sure they were really gone before he tried to move. Everything hurt. The ribs, the head wound, his hands where the ropes had cut circulation. He was soaked, freezing, and miles from anywhere safe. Perfect. He forced himself to his feet, swaying with dizziness. The shack was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the dark sky. All his supplies, what little he'd salvaged, gone. Again. But he was alive. That counted for something. North. Mei Lin had gone north, following his instructions. If she'd moved fast enough, kept ahead of any pursuit, she might reach Fletcher's place by morning. Fletcher owed Caleb a favor, a big one, and he was the kind of man who paid his debts. Caleb started walking, following tracks already half filled with fresh snow. The storm was getting worse, wind cutting through his wet clothes like knives. He'd freeze if he didn't find shelter soon. A mile from the burned shack, he found Titan. The dog was waiting under an overhang of rock, shivering but alert. When he saw Caleb, he bounded out, circling and whining with distress. "Where is she?" Caleb grabbed the dog's collar. "Where's Mei Lin?" Titan pulled, trying to lead him somewhere. Caleb followed on legs that barely worked, trusting the animal's instincts. The dog had come back for him, which meant Mei Lin had sent him or let him go. Either way, it meant she was still free. They found her a quarter-mile further north, sheltered in a hollow beneath a fallen tree. She'd wrapped herself in pine branches for insulation, the document case clutched to her chest. When she saw him, her eyes went wide. "You're alive. Surprised me too." Caleb collapsed beside her, suddenly unable to stand anymore. "Thought I told you to keep moving. I sent the dog back. Couldn't leave you." She touched his face, fingers coming away bloody. "They hurt you." "Not as bad as they wanted to. Tate let me go." "Why?" "Because I made him think about consequences." Caleb closed his eyes, fighting waves of nausea from the concussion. "Won't last. Morrison will be furious when he finds out. We need to move." "You can barely walk." "I'll manage." "You'll die." Mei Lin's voice was firm. "We're staying here until you can actually stand without falling over. Then we move." "Not safe. Nowhere's safe. But you're no good to me dead." She arranged the pine branches around them both, creating a pocket of slightly warmer air. "Rest. I'll keep watch." Caleb wanted to argue, but his body was already shutting down. The adrenaline that had carried him through the fight, the fire, the walk through the snow, all of it was draining away. His eyes closed despite his best efforts. "Caleb." Mei Lin's voice pulled him back from the edge of unconsciousness. "Thank you for not giving me up. Wasn't an option." "It was. You could have walked away at any point. You still could." "So could you. Could have left me in that shack." "Then I guess we're both stubborn." "Guess so." He slept or passed out. Hard to tell the difference. Dreams mixed with memories, the shack burning, Tate's fists, Morrison's hands around Mei Lin's throat. He woke gasping, disoriented, to find her pressed against him for warmth, the dog curled around both of them. The storm had passed. Early morning light filtered through the trees, weak but steady. Caleb's head felt like someone had used it for a drum, but he could think clearly again. Mei Lin was awake, watching him with those dark, assessing eyes. "How long?" he asked. "Few hours. You were talking in your sleep." "About what?" "The war, mostly. Names I didn't recognize. You kept apologizing to someone named Thomas." Caleb looked away. Thomas Whelan, his sergeant, dead at Wilson's Creek because Caleb had hesitated, second-guessed an order, cost them 3 seconds that meant everything. "We need to move," he said, changing the subject. "Fletcher Settlement is still about 8 miles north. Can you make it?" "Can you?" I asked first. "I can make it." She stood slowly, testing her injuries. The ribs were still bothering her. He could see it in how she moved, but she was steady. "What's this Fletcher like?" "Reliable, keeps his word, doesn't ask questions he doesn't need answers to." "You trust him?" "Much as I trust anyone." They walked north through snow that was knee-deep in places, following the creek like Caleb had instructed. Titan ranged ahead, alert for danger. The mountains were quiet except for wind through the pines and the occasional crack of ice breaking. "Tell me about Morrison," Caleb said after a while. "Everything you remember. How he talked, what he looked like, anything that might help identify him." Mei Lin was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. Tall, maybe 6 feet. The scar I mentioned crosses his left cheek from eye to jaw. Old wound, healed badly. He wore expensive clothes, city style, but moved like someone used to rough work. Accent? Eastern. Boston, maybe. Educated speech, but coarse underneath, like he'd learned manners late. And he knew about the documents you were carrying, New details. Very specific details. He asked about ledgers from April and May, wanted to know if I'd copied the immigration files, seemed particularly worried about correspondence with officials in Sacramento. She frowned. He was more concerned about some documents than others, like certain names being exposed mattered more than the general pattern. That was interesting. Suggested Morrison was protecting specific people, not just the company as a whole. The men with him, Caleb pressed. They follow his orders? Two of them did without question. The third, the one who argued about killing me, he seemed less committed, called Morrison sir, but didn't sound like he meant it. Hired muscle versus true believers. Good to know. They walked in silence for a while, conserving energy. The cold was brutal, seeping through wet clothes despite their movement. Caleb's ribs ached with every breath, and he was pretty sure at least two were cracked. The head wound had stopped bleeding, but throbbed in time with his heartbeat. Maylin wasn't much better. She was limping now, favoring her left side, and her face had gone pale with exertion. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to rest, just kept putting one foot in front of the other. Stubborn didn't begin to cover it. When we get to Fletcher's, Caleb said, we'll need supplies, food, warm clothes, ammunition, and horses. Can't make it to Denver on foot. Do you have money? Some. Fletcher will front us credit if I ask. And then what? We just ride into Denver and hope Morrison's men don't find us first? We ride into Denver and make enough noise that Morrison can't touch us without exposing himself. Caleb had been thinking about this all night. You mentioned a federal prosecutor. What was his name? Samuel Hackett. But I don't know if he'll see me. The letter I sent was vague. I didn't want to put details in writing that could be intercepted. Doesn't matter. We get to him, tell him everything, and make it official. Once your testimony is on record, Morrison can't just make you disappear. He could kill me before I testify. He could try. Maylin looked at him. You're planning to stay with me. Through this whole thing. It wasn't a question, but Caleb answered anyway. Yes. Why? The marriage arrangement was just paperwork. You don't owe me this. Maybe I owe it to myself. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. She accepted that, and they walked on. The sun was higher now, warming the air just enough to be noticeable. The creek ran clear and fast beside them, breaking through ice in places where the current was strong. By midday, they saw smoke rising above the trees. Fletcher's settlement. It wasn't much. A trading post, a smithy, a handful of cabins scattered along the creek. Maybe 30 people total, hardy souls who'd chosen isolation over civilization. Fletcher ran the trading post and served as unofficial mayor, judge, and occasionally executioner when necessary. He was standing on the post's porch when they arrived, a big man with a beard gone mostly gray and eyes that missed nothing. When he saw Caleb, his expression shifted from wariness to surprise. Rourke, heard you were dead. Heard wrong. Apparently. Fletcher's eyes moved to Maylin, taking in her injuries and exhaustion. This the trouble following you? I'm the trouble, Maylin said before Caleb could answer. He's just trying to help. Fletcher grunted, which could have meant anything. Come inside, you both look like hell. The trading post was warm, heated by a stove that glowed red. Fletcher's wife, a Ute woman named Sarah, took one look at them and started issuing orders. Hot water, clean bandages, food. Within minutes, they were seated by the stove with coffee and bread while Sarah cleaned their wounds. Fletcher waited until they'd eaten before asking questions. What happened? Caleb gave him the short version, the attack on Maylin, the burned cabin, Tate and his men, Morrison's involvement. Fletcher listened without interrupting, face impassive. This Morrison, Fletcher said when Caleb finished. He's serious about killing you both? Very serious. And you plan to ride into Denver anyway? Yes. That's suicide. That's making a stand. Fletcher looked at Maylin. You understand what he's proposing? Once you testify, you'll be a target for the rest of your life. These company men, they don't forgive and they don't forget. I understand, Maylin said, and I'm doing it anyway. Brave or stupid? Hard to tell which. Can be both. Fletcher smiled at that, the first real expression since they'd arrived. Sarah, get them proper clothes and see about horses. He turned to Caleb. You'll need more than luck to make it to Denver alive. I'll take whatever help you're offering. I'm offering supplies and transport. The rest is up to you. He paused. That favor I owe you. We're square after this. Understood? Understood. They spent 2 days at Fletcher's settlement, recovering strength and planning their route. Sarah proved to be as skilled with medicine as her husband was with logistics. She rebound Caleb's ribs properly, stitched the head wound that had been bleeding again, and forced both of them to rest despite their protests. Mei Lin used the time to write everything down. Every detail she remembered about the Pacific Labor Company. Morrison, the documents she'd gathered. Names, dates, places, all of it documented in careful script. If something happened to her before they reached Denver, at least the information would survive. Caleb watched her work, impressed by her thoroughness. This wasn't just about revenge or justice. This was about creating a record, ensuring that what she knew wouldn't die with her. On the third morning, Fletcher declared them fit to travel. He provided 2 horses, good mountain stock, sturdy and sure-footed, along with supplies, weapons, and enough ammunition to fight a small war. Route I'm suggesting takes you through the western valleys, Fletcher said, pointing to a hand-drawn map. Longer than going direct, but fewer people, less chance of running into Morrison's men. You make good time, you'll reach Denver in 5 days. And if we run into trouble? Caleb asked. Then you use those rifles I gave you and make it expensive for them. Fletcher's expression was grim. Morrison's been asking around. Word's out that he's looking for a Chinese woman and the man protecting her. There's money on your heads, serious money. How much? 500 for the woman, dead or alive, though I suspect Morrison prefers dead. He paused. 1,000 for you, alive only. Caleb felt something cold settle in his gut. $1,000 was a fortune to most frontier men, the kind of money that made good people consider bad choices. Morrison wants to question you, Fletcher continued. Find out what you know, who you've told. Then he'll kill you anyway, but not before making sure the secret dies with you. Mei Lin's hand found Caleb's under the table. Her grip was tight, steadying. We'll be careful, Caleb said. Being careful won't be enough. You need to be smart, fast, and willing to shoot first. Fletcher looked at Mei Lin. You know how to use that rifle? Yes. Then use it. Don't hesitate. Don't give them chances they won't give you. They left at dawn, riding west into mountains that were beautiful and indifferent. The horses moved well, finding their own rhythm on the narrow trails. Titan ran alongside, tireless, happy to be moving again. For the first day, they saw no one. The route Fletcher had chosen avoided settlements and main trails, following game paths and old mining roads that had been abandoned years ago. It was isolated, lonely country, exactly what they needed. Camp that night was cold but efficient. They built a small fire in a protected hollow, ate dried meat and hardtack, and took turns keeping watch. When it was Mei Lin's shift, Caleb found himself too wired to sleep despite his exhaustion. Tell me about your family, he said. Besides your brother. Mei Lin looked at him, surprised. Why? Because I don't know anything about you except that you're stubborn and dangerous. And you want to know more? Seems relevant, given we might die together. She smiled at that. My father was a fisherman, like I said. My mother helped mend nets and sell the catch. I had 3 sisters, all older, all married before I was 15. I was the youngest, the one who asked too many questions and never quite fit the expectations. What kind of expectations? The usual ones for daughters. Be quiet, be obedient, marry well, produce sons. She poked at the fire with a stick. I could do 2 out of 4, which wasn't enough. So you left. Eventually. After my brother disappeared and my uncle never returned, I started asking why. Why did Chinese workers die at higher rates than white workers? Why were contracts enforced against us but not for us? Why did laws exist that weren't applied equally? She looked at him. Those questions made me unpopular in Guangdong and dangerous in San Francisco. But you kept asking them. Because someone has to. Because silence is how injustice survives. Caleb thought about that. About the things he'd seen during the war and chosen not to speak about. Atrocities on both sides. Civilians caught in the middle. Decisions made by men who'd never faced consequences. He'd told himself it wasn't his business, wasn't his fight. Looking at Mei Lin now, seeing the determination in her eyes despite everything she'd suffered, he felt something like shame. When we get to Denver, he said, and you testify, I'll be there. Whatever you need, whatever happens, I'll be there. You already promised that. I'm promising again. So you know it's not just impulse or obligation. It's a choice. Maylin reached across the fire, took his hand. Thank you. They sat like that for a while, hands linked, watching the fire burn down. Titan slept nearby, one ear swiveled toward the trail. The mountains were silent except for wind through the pines and the occasional crack of settling ice. Tomorrow they'd ride deeper into the wilderness, closer to Denver and whatever waited there. Morrison's men were hunting them. Bounty hunters were looking for easy money, and the law might not believe anything they had to say. The odds weren't good, weren't even close to good. But sitting here with Maylin, feeling her hand in his, Caleb thought maybe that didn't matter as much as he'd thought. They'd survived this far, together. That had to count for something. The ambush came on the fourth day, at a narrow pass where the trail wound between two cliff faces. Caleb saw the glint of sunlight on metal a second before the first shot rang out. He yanked his horse left, shouting at Maylin to get down, and felt the bullet pass close enough to hear it whistle. They'd been careful, changed routes twice, avoided settlements, kept watch in shifts. But Morrison's men had found them anyway. 3 riders blocked the trail ahead. 2 more appeared behind, cutting off retreat. Professional positioning, no wasted movement. These weren't the same crew from the shack. These men knew what they were doing. Off the horses! Caleb pulled Maylin from her saddle as another shot cracked against stone. They scrambled for cover behind a boulder while the horses bolted, panicked by gunfire. Titan was already there, pressed low, growling. Smart dog. 5 of them, Maylin said, breathing hard. She had her rifle up, checking the load. We can't fight 5. Don't have to fight them. Just have to survive them. The man who stepped into view wasn't Tate. This one was older, harder, with the kind of stillness that came from absolute confidence. He held a rifle casual in one hand like it was an extension of his body. Caleb Rourke! The voice was weathered, matter of fact. Name's Keller. We don't have to do this the hard way. Then don't do it at all, Caleb called back. Can't do that. Got a job to finish. Keller paused. Morrison's offering $1,500 now. That's serious money for just one woman. $1,500. Fletcher had said 5. Morrison was getting desperate, upping the stakes. Woman's under my protection, Caleb shouted. That means something. Meant something once, maybe. These days it just means you're in the way. Maylin touched his arm. The cliff face, she whispered. There's a gap about 20 yards west. Looks like it might go through. Caleb glanced where she indicated. She was right. A crack in the rock, narrow but possibly passable. If they could reach it without getting shot, big if. I'm giving you one chance, Keller's voice again. Send the woman out. You walk away with half the bounty. $750, clean money, no questions. And I'm supposed to trust you? You're supposed to be smart. War's over, Rourke. No more causes worth dying for. Caleb thought about Thomas Whelan, about all the men he'd watched die for causes that seemed righteous at the time and meaningless in hindsight. Keller wasn't wrong about that part. But he was wrong about Maylin. Counteroffer, Caleb called. You leave now. I don't kill any of you. Silence. Then Keller laughed, genuine amusement in the sound. You always this stubborn? It's a character flaw. Fair enough. Can't say I didn't try. The shooting started immediately. Systematic, measured fire designed to pin them down while Keller's men moved into better positions. Caleb returned fire, not aiming to hit but to make them cautious, by seconds. When I say go, he told Maylin, you run for that gap. Don't look back. Don't wait for me. Just run. We go together or not at all. That's not together. Her eyes were fierce. I didn't cross an ocean to watch another person die for me. No time to argue. Caleb whistled sharp and short, the command that sent Titan running. The dog bolted from cover, drawing fire and attention, racing toward the gap like his tail was on fire. Now! They ran. Caleb fired behind them without aiming, just making noise, creating chaos. A bullet struck stone inches from his head, spraying rock chips. Another punched through his coat without touching skin. Lucky. Maylin was faster than she should have been with broken ribs, pure adrenaline overriding pain. She reached the gap first, squeezed through, and Caleb followed as bullets hammered the cliff face around them. The gap went deeper than it looked, angling down and back into the mountain. They scrambled through darkness, hands scraping on rough stone until daylight appeared ahead. A different exit, lower down the slope. Behind them, they could hear Keller's men shouting, trying to follow. But the gap was narrow, would slow them down by precious minutes. They emerged into a pine forest, ran downhill with gravity helping, and didn't stop until Caleb's lungs were burning and Mei Lin was stumbling with exhaustion. Titan found them 10 minutes later, tongue hanging out, unharmed. The horses were gone, along with most of their supplies. They had what they were carrying, rifles, ammunition, the document case Mei Lin had strapped to her back, and nothing else. "How far to Denver?" Mei Lin gasped. 30 miles, maybe more." "On foot?" "On foot." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "Of course." They walked through the afternoon and into evening, following game trails and creek beds, staying off anything that looked like a real path. Keller would expect them to run straight for Denver, would have men watching the main approaches, so they went sideways, taking the long route through rough country. By nightfall, they were exhausted, hungry, and no closer to safety. Caleb found a deadfall that offered some protection from wind, and they huddled there. No fire, just body heat and stubbornness. "Tell me something," Mei Lin said after a while. "If we make it to Denver, if I testify and somehow we survive this, what happens after?" "After? The marriage arrangement? Are we actually going through with it?" Caleb hadn't let himself think that far ahead. Survival was a day-to-day proposition right now, and planning for a future felt like tempting fate. "I don't know," he admitted. "What do you want?" "I want to not be hunted. I want my brother's death to mean something. I want the Pacific Labor Company destroyed and Morrison in prison." She paused. "Beyond that, I haven't thought much about wants. We could figure it out as we go." "That's very romantic." "Never claimed to be romantic." "You keep saying that." She shifted closer, sharing warmth. "But you burned your own cabin to save me, fought off armed men, are walking 30 miles through hostile territory to help me testify." Her voice was soft. "That seems fairly romantic. That's just not being a bastard." "The bar is low, I see." Caleb smiled despite everything. "Real low." They slept in shifts, cold and uncomfortable but alive. Morning brought frost and the sound of distant riders, Keller's men, still searching. They moved carefully, staying low, using every bit of cover the forest offered. By midday they could see Denver in the distance, a sprawl of buildings at the base of the mountains, smoke rising from hundreds of chimneys. Civilization, law, protection. Or so they hoped. "Once we're in the city," Caleb said, "we head straight for the federal building. Find this prosecutor, Hackett, and you tell him everything before Morrison knows we're there. And if Morrison already has people watching the federal building, then we get creative." They entered Denver from the west. Two dirty, exhausted travelers who drew looks but no immediate alarm. The streets were busy. Miners, merchants, Chinese laborers hauling goods, prostitutes working early shifts. A city that ran on commerce and didn't ask too many questions. The federal building was downtown, a 3-story brick structure that tried for dignity and mostly achieved bureaucracy. Caleb and Mei Lin climbed the steps, pushed through heavy doors, and found themselves in a hallway that smelled like old paper and newer ink. A clerk looked up from his desk, took in their appearance, and frowned. "Can I help you?" "We need to see Samuel Hackett," Mei Lin said. "It's urgent." "Mr. Hackett is very busy. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but he'll want to see me. My name is Mei Lin Chen, and I have information about the Pacific Labor Company." The clerk's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or concern. "Wait here." He disappeared through a door marked private and was gone for 5 minutes that felt like 50. Caleb kept watch on the entrance, hand near his pistol, expecting Morrison's men to come through at any moment. The clerk returned with another man, tall, middle-aged, with the kind of face that had seen too many disappointments and stopped being surprised by them. "Miss Chen, I'm Samuel Hackett. I received your letter." His eyes moved to Caleb. "And you are?" "Caleb Rourke, I'm with her." "I see." Hackett glanced at the clerk. "James, hold all my appointments, and send someone to fetch Marshal Dawson." He turned back to them. "Come with me." His office was cramped, walls lined with law books and file boxes. Hackett closed the door, gestured to chairs, and sat behind a desk piled with papers. "Your letter was vague," he said to Mei Lin, "but intriguing. You claim to have evidence of labor fraud and possible homicide related to the Pacific Labor Company. I had evidence. It was destroyed by men working for the company, but I can testify to what I saw, what I documented." She leaned forward, "And I can tell you about Morrison, the man who tried to kill me to keep that information from reaching you." Hackett's expression sharpened. "James Morrison? I don't know his first name. Tall, scar across his left cheek, works for the Pacific Labor Company as head of security operations." Hackett sat back, fingers steepled. "James Morrison is a former Pinkerton agent with a reputation for getting results through methods that don't always pass legal scrutiny. If he's involved, this is more serious than I thought." "He tried to strangle me and left me for dead in the mountains," Mei Lin said flatly. "Then he sent men to finish the job. One of them is named Keller. He tried to kill us 4 days ago." "Keller." Hackett pulled out a notepad, started writing. "First name?" "Don't know, but he mentioned Morrison specifically, said the bounty had increased." "There's a bounty on you." $1,500 last I heard." Hackett's pen stopped moving. That was serious money, the kind that attracted serious attention. "And you still came here, knowing that, because someone needs to hear what I know. Someone needs to stop what they're doing." Mei Lin's voice was steady, but Caleb could see her hands trembling slightly. "I worked in their San Francisco office for 8 months. I saw how the contracts were structured to trap workers in permanent debt. I documented payments to immigration officials for looking the other way when workers complained. I have names, dates, amounts." "Had," Hackett corrected gently. "You said the evidence was destroyed." "The physical evidence, yes, but I remember. I wrote everything down again." She pulled papers from the document case, the notes she'd made at Fletcher's settlement. "It's not the same as the original documents, but it's a start." Hackett took the papers, scanned them quickly. His expression grew darker with each page. "This is extensive. If even half of this is true, it's all true. Then the Pacific Labor Company is running a criminal enterprise with government complicity." He looked up. "You understand what you're accusing them of? The kind of resources they can bring to bear?" "I've spent the last 2 weeks running from those resources," Mei Lin said. "I understand perfectly." A knock on the door. The clerk entered, followed by a man wearing a marshal's badge. Weathered face, sharp eyes, gun worn easy on his hip. "Hackett, what's this about?" The marshal's voice was rough, impatient. "Marshal Dawson, this is Mei Lin Chen and Caleb Rourke. Miss Chen is here to provide testimony regarding criminal activities by the Pacific Labor Company, specifically involving their head of security, James Morrison." Dawson's eyes narrowed. "Morrison? He's in Denver?" "Was 3 days ago," Caleb said. "Might still be, depending on how fast word travels." "And you two have been running from him." "From him and about a dozen men he hired to kill us. Burned my cabin, shot at us in the mountains, offered bounties, the usual." Dawson looked at Hackett. "This official?" "It is now. I'm opening an investigation into the Pacific Labor Company based on Miss Chen's testimony." Hackett's voice was firm, bureaucratic authority snapping into place. "She'll need protection while we verify her claims and build a case." "Protection?" Dawson didn't sound enthusiastic. "For how long?" "However long it takes." "Morrison has serious connections, Hackett. Politicians, businessmen, half the territorial government owes favors to the Labor Company. You start poking that hornet's nest, people are going to push back." "Let them push." Hackett stood. "I've been looking for a way to investigate the Labor Company for 6 months. Every time I get close, witnesses disappear or evidence goes missing. Miss Chen is the first person willing to testify publicly, or the first person who doesn't know better." Mei Lin spoke up, voice cutting. "I know exactly what I'm doing, Marshal, and I'm doing it anyway." Dawson studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but we do this smart. No public announcements until we have you secured somewhere Morrison can't reach." He looked at Caleb. "You planning to stay with her?" "Yes." "Can you shoot?" "I can shoot." "Then you just became a deputy. Unofficial, unpaid, but legal enough to carry that pistol in city limits." Dawson moved to the door. "Come on, We've got a safe house on the east side, used to hide witnesses during the mining trials. They followed him out, back through the federal building and into the street. The afternoon sun was bright, almost painful after days in the mountains. People went about their business, unaware that the woman walking past them was about to upend one of the territory's largest companies. The safe house was a nondescript building on a quiet street. 2 stories, barred windows, thick door. Dawson unlocked it and ushered them inside. You stay here until I say otherwise. Don't go to windows, don't answer the door unless it's me or one of my deputies. He pulled out a ring of keys. There's food in the kitchen, beds upstairs, water pump in back. When do I testify? Mei Lin asked. Hackett will need time to prepare, gather supporting evidence, interview other potential witnesses, build the case properly. Dawson paused. Assuming there are other witnesses. There are. Workers who escaped the company's control, people who saw things but were afraid to speak. Mei Lin's voice was certain. Once they hear someone's finally listening, they'll come forward. Hope you're right. Dawson headed for the door. I'll have men watching the street. Anyone approaches this house who isn't wearing a badge, you shoot first and we'll sort out questions later. He left, and suddenly the house was very quiet. Caleb checked the rooms systematically. Exits, sight lines, defensible positions, old habits from the war, calculating fields of fire and retreat routes. The house was solid, well-positioned, but far from impregnable. If Morrison came with enough men, they'd be trapped. Mei Lin was in the kitchen, examining the food supplies with the practical eye of someone who'd survived on very little. Enough here for maybe a week if we're careful. Should be enough. Hackett will move fast once he starts. Dragging this out helps Morrison more than us. You trust him? Hackett? Caleb thought about the prosecutor's face, the way he'd reacted to Mei Lin's information. I think he's ambitious, wants to make a name for himself by taking down the labor company. That doesn't mean he cares about you specifically, but it means your interests align. And Dawson? Lawman doing his job. Won't go out of his way to help, but won't betray you either, not unless the pressure gets too heavy. Comforting. Honest. She smiled at that, tired but genuine. I suppose honest is better than comforting lies. They ate in silence, cold beans and hard bread that tasted like the finest meal after days of nothing. Titan got the scraps and settled in a corner with a contented groan. Upstairs there were 2 bedrooms with narrow beds and thin mattresses. Mei Lin claimed one and Caleb took the other, but neither of them slept well. Every sound outside, a passing cart, voices in the street, a dog barking, brought them alert, hands reaching for weapons. Morning came with a knock on the door. Caleb was there instantly, rifle ready, while Mei Lin covered from the stairs. Deputy Warren, a voice called. Marshal Dawson sent me. Caleb cracked the door open, saw a young man in a deputy's badge, and reluctantly let him in. Warren was maybe 25, nervous energy radiating off him. Marshal says to tell you Hackett's already started interviewing witnesses. Found 3 Chinese workers who escaped from a labor company camp outside the city. Their stories match what you said, Miss Chen. Warren was talking fast, excited. And there's more. A reporter from the Rocky Mountain News heard about the investigation, wants to talk to you. No reporters, Caleb said immediately. But that's perfect. Warren looked confused. Get the story out there, public pressure, ooh. Also puts a target on her back that's even bigger than it already is. The marshal thought, I don't care what the marshal thought. No reporters until after she testifies. Warren looked uncertain, caught between orders and common sense. Finally, he nodded. I'll tell him, but he won't like it. After Warren left, Mei Lin came down the stairs. He's right, you know, a newspaper story could help. Make it harder for Morrison to act, or make it easier for him to find you before you're ready. I'm ready now. You're exhausted, injured, and running on anger. That's not ready. Caleb moved to the window, checked the street. We wait until Hackett has his case solid. Then you testify, then the story goes public, in that order. You're very bossy for someone who claims not to be romantic. Despite everything, he smiled. Character flaw. The day passed slowly. More deputies came and went, bringing news of Hackett's investigation. More witnesses had come forward. Workers, dockhands, a clerk from the labor company's Denver office who'd seen things that didn't match the official books. The case was building, gaining momentum. But so was Morrison's response. That evening, Dawson himself returned, face grim. Morrison knows you're in the city. Don't know how, but word's out. He's filing countercharges. Says you stole company property, assaulted his men, are spreading malicious lies to damage the labor company's reputation. That's absurd, Maylin said. Maybe. But he's got lawyers, affidavits, witnesses of his own. Says you're a disgruntled former employee with a grudge. Dawson's voice was flat. And he's asking for your arrest pending investigation of the theft charges. Caleb felt cold settle in his gut. Can he do that? Technically, yes. He's filed proper charges, has supporting documentation. I can hold off for a day, maybe two, but eventually I'll have to act or risk contempt charges myself. This is a delay tactic, Maylin said. He's trying to slow down Hackett's investigation. Obviously, but that doesn't make it less effective. Dawson looked at her directly. You need to testify soon before Morrison's lawyers bog this down in procedural fights that could last months. How soon? Tomorrow if possible. Day after at the latest. I'll be ready. After Dawson left, Caleb and Mei Lin sat in the kitchen, processing the new reality. Morrison wasn't just hunting her anymore. He was using the legal system as a weapon, turning laws meant to protect people into tools of oppression. This was always going to be hard, Mei Lin said quietly. I knew that when I started gathering evidence. Knew it when I ran. Knew it when you found me. She looked at him. But I'm not giving up, not now. Didn't think you would. Even if we lose? Even if Morrison wins and I end up arrested or dead? Especially then. Caleb reached across the table, took her hand. Because the alternative is letting men like him decide who matters and who doesn't, and I'm done with that. She squeezed his hand, and they sat there as darkness fell outside and the city settled into its evening rhythms. Tomorrow would bring testimony, confrontation, and whatever response Morrison had planned. But tonight, they had this moment of quiet, and the certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. The attack came at midnight. Not Morrison's men this time. The City Watch, led by a captain named Sullivan, who wore his authority like armor. He had a warrant, legal and proper, signed by a territorial judge. Maylin Chen, you're under arrest for theft and destruction of property belonging to the Pacific Labor Company. Caleb stepped between Sullivan and Maylin, hand on his pistol. She's under federal protection. You can't... This warrant supersedes federal jurisdiction in criminal matters. Sullivan's voice was cold, bureaucratic. Stand aside or be charged with obstruction. The charges are false, Maylin said. Morrison is manufacturing evidence. That's for a judge to decide. Right now, you're coming with me. More City Watch behind Sullivan, hands on weapons. Too many to fight, too official to refuse. Caleb looked at Mei Lin, saw her face set with determination. It's all right, she said quietly. We knew this might happen. No, we fight this. With what? We can't shoot city watchmen. She stepped forward. I'll go. But I want it on record that I'm cooperating under protest, and I demand to see Prosecutor Hackett immediately. Sullivan nodded. Noted. Now put your hands out. They locked iron manacles around her wrists, heavy, degrading, meant to humiliate as much as restrain. Caleb felt rage burning in his chest but forced it down. Losing control now wouldn't help her. Where are you taking her? He demanded. City jail. She'll appear before Judge Carson in the morning. Sullivan paused. You try to interfere, I'll arrest you too. They took her out into the night, a small woman in chains surrounded by armed men. Caleb watched from the doorway, helpless, as the woman who'd crossed an ocean and survived Morrison's attempts to kill her was led away by the same law that was supposed to protect her. Titan whined softly, sensing his distress. I know, boy. Caleb's voice was rough. I know. He had until morning to figure out how to save her, and morning was only 6 hours away. Caleb didn't sleep. He paced the safe house like a caged animal, mind working through scenarios that all ended badly. Mei Lin was in a cell, vulnerable, exactly where Morrison wanted her. By morning, she'd face a judge who might be compromised, lawyers who'd twist her words, and a system designed to protect men like Morrison while grinding people like her into dust. He'd promised to stand with her, but standing with someone in a courtroom didn't mean much when the courthouse itself was rigged. Around 3 a.m, someone knocked. Caleb had his rifle up before the second knock finished. It's Hackett. He opened the door to find the prosecutor looking haggard, eyes red from lack of sleep. Behind him was a woman Caleb didn't recognize, middle-aged, Chinese, dressed in simple but clean clothes. "This is Lin Hua," Hackett said, stepping inside. "She works as a translator and runs a boarding house for Chinese workers. She's been helping me find witnesses." Lin Hua bowed slightly. "Mr. Rourke, Mei Lin spoke of you in her letter to Mr. Hackett. She said if anything happened to her, you would continue the fight." "Nothing's happened to her yet. But it will, unless we act quickly." Lin Hua's English was precise, deliberate. "I know Judge Carson. He is not a bad man, but he is practical. He responds to pressure, to what benefits him politically. Morrison has already been to see him." "How do you know?" "Because I have people who watch, who listen, who understand that information is the only power we have." She moved to the table, spread out papers she'd been carrying. "These are affidavits from 17 workers who escaped from Pacific Labor Company operations. Each one details abuse, fraudulent contracts, deaths that were covered up. Mr. Hackett has verified their authenticity." Hackett nodded. "If I can get these admitted as evidence, they corroborate everything Mei Lin has been saying. But Morrison's lawyers will fight to exclude them, claim they're biased, unreliable." "So we need more than just testimony," Caleb said. "We need Morrison himself." "We need him to make a mistake," Hackett corrected. "Right now he's playing this legally. Warrants, charges, lawyers. All proper and official. But if he tries something extra legal, he will." Lin Hua's voice was certain. "Men like Morrison, they believe they are above consequences. When the legal approach doesn't work fast enough, they revert to violence." "The hearing is at 9, Hackett said. "Judge Carson will review the charges, hear arguments, and decide whether to release Mei Lin or hold her for trial. That's our window. Morrison knows it too. If she's released, she can testify in my investigation. If she's held, the case gets delayed for months while his lawyers drag things out." "So he'll try to prevent her from ever making it to that hearing." "That's my concern, yes." Caleb thought about it, about Morrison's pattern so far. The man was methodical, careful, but ultimately he relied on force when legal manipulation failed. And Mei Lin in a cell, surrounded by guards who could be bribed or threatened. "We need to move her," Caleb said, "before Morrison does." "Move a prisoner out of city jail? That's kidnapping." Hackett looked uncomfortable. "I can't authorize that. I'm not asking for authorization. I'm telling you what needs to happen." Caleb met his eyes. "You want your case? You want your witnesses? Then we make sure Mei Lin lives to testify." Lin Hua spoke quietly. "There are guards at the jail who owe favors to the community. Men whose families I have helped, whose children I have fed. They would listen to me." "You're talking about breaking the law," Hackett said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm talking about protecting a witness from assassination." Caleb grabbed his coat. "You can help her get out of the way. Your choice." Hackett was silent for a long moment, wrestling with his conscience and his ambition. Finally, he nodded. "If she's moved, it has to be to federal custody. That makes it legal, technically. I'll prepare the paperwork, backdate it if necessary, but you have to get her out first." "We will." Lin Hua was already moving toward the door. "Come, Mr. Rourke. We have 3 hours before the shift change." The city jail was a squat brick building that smelled like unwashed bodies and desperation. Lin Hua led Caleb to a side entrance, knocked in a specific pattern, and waited. The guard who opened the door was young, Chinese, with the kind of face that had seen too much too fast. He looked at Lin Hua, then at Caleb, and stepped aside without a word. "Chen Bao," Lin Hua said. "He is my cousin's son. The Pacific Labor Company killed his father in a mining accident 3 years ago and paid nothing to the family. He understands what is at stake." Chen Bao led them through dark corridors, past cells where men slept or stared at nothing. The jail was quiet, most prisoners too tired or broken to cause trouble. Mei Lin's cell was in the back, separated from the others. Special prisoner, special handling. She was sitting on a narrow bench, hands still manacled, and when she saw Caleb, her expression shifted from resignation to surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Getting you out." "That's illegal." "So is manufacturing evidence to frame an innocent woman." Caleb turned to Chen Bao. "Can you open this?" The guard produced a key, unlocked the cell, then removed Mei Lin's manacles. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was steady. "There will be trouble for this. For me, For my family. There will be protection, Lin Hua said firmly. I give you my word. When this is over, you and your family will have safe passage to California if you wish it, and work waiting for you there. Chen Bao nodded, accepting the promise. Go quickly. The captain makes rounds in 20 minutes. They moved fast, retracing their path through the jail. Mei Lin was unsteady on her feet. The cell had been cold and her injuries were still healing, but she kept pace without complaint. Outside, the pre-dawn air was sharp and clean. Lin Hua had a wagon waiting, covered with canvas, and she gestured for them to climb in back. Where are we going? Mei Lin asked. Federal building. Hackett is preparing custody transfer papers right now. By the time anyone notices you're gone, you'll be legally in federal protection. Lin Hua climbed onto the wagon seat. But we must hurry. Morrison has men watching the jail. She wasn't wrong. As the wagon pulled away, Caleb saw movement in the shadows across the street, men who were trying too hard to look casual. They'd notice soon that something was wrong. The ride to the federal building took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Every street corner could hide an ambush. Every passerby could be one of Morrison's hired guns. But they made it, pulling up to the rear entrance just as the sky was beginning to lighten. Hackett was there with Deputy Warren and 2 federal marshals Caleb didn't recognize. They hustled Mei Lin inside and Hackett thrust papers into her hands. Sign these. Federal Witness Protection Agreement. You're officially in my custody now, which means the city charges are suspended pending federal investigation. He was talking fast, lawyer efficient. The hearing at 9 still happens, but you'll be appearing as my witness, not as a defendant. It changes everything. Mei Lin signed without reading. There wasn't time for reading. Hackett countersigned, had the marshals witness, and then tucked the documents into his case like they were the most precious things in the world. Now we prepare your testimony, he said. You have 4 hours to tell me everything you know, every detail you remember, organized in a way that will hold up under Morrison's lawyers. Can you do that? Yes. Mei Lin's voice was steady despite her exhaustion. I can do that. They worked in Hackett's office as the city woke around them. Mei Lin spoke, Hackett wrote, and gradually a narrative emerged, detailed, damning, impossible to dismiss as the ravings of a disgruntled employee. She had dates, names, specific incidents, the kind of testimony that prosecutors dreamed about. Caleb stood guard at the door, watching the street through the window. Around 7, he saw them arrive. Morrison's men, at least a dozen, spreading out around the federal building, not attacking, just watching, making their presence known. We've got company, he said. Hackett looked up from his notes, moved to the window, and cursed quietly. They're waiting to see what we do. If we try to move Mei Lin to the courthouse, they'll hit us in transit. So we don't move her. We bring the courthouse here. That's not how it works. Make it how it works. Caleb turned to face him. You're a federal prosecutor investigating interstate commerce fraud. You have jurisdiction to conduct hearings wherever you deem necessary for witness safety. Judge Carson can come here, hear the arguments here, make his ruling here. He'll never agree to that. He will if the alternative is explaining to the territorial governor why a federal witness was assassinated on the way to his courtroom. Caleb's voice was hard. You wanted to make a name for yourself with this case. Here's your chance. Do something that matters. Hackett stared at him, then at Mei Lin, then out the window at Morrison's men. Something shifted in his expression, the calculation of a man deciding which way to jump when both options carried risk. Warren, he shouted, get Marshal Dawson here now, and send a courier to Judge Carson with my compliments and a very urgent request. The next 2 hours were chaos, barely controlled. Judge Carson initially refused, then reconsidered when Dawson explained the security situation in terms that emphasized the judge's personal liability. Morrison's lawyers protested, filed motions, threatened appeals. The Rocky Mountain News got wind of what was happening and sent a reporter who camped outside the federal building demanding statements. Through it all, Mei Lin sat in Hackett's office, reviewing her testimony, preparing for the fight. Caleb brought her coffee and bread, made sure she ate, and tried not to think about all the ways this could still fall apart. At 10 o'clock, Judge Carson arrived with his clerk and a very unhappy expression. He set up in the federal building's main hearing room, a space normally used for administrative proceedings, and called the parties to order. This is highly irregular, he began. These are irregular circumstances, Your Honor. Hackett stood. every inch the confident prosecutor. We're here to address charges filed by the Pacific Labor Company against my witness, Miss Mei-Lin Chen. I argue these charges are fraudulent, designed to intimidate and silence a witness in a federal investigation. Morrison's lawyer, a polished man named Whitmore, who radiated expensive education and moral flexibility, rose smoothly. Your Honor, this is a transparent attempt to shield a criminal from legitimate prosecution. Ms. Chen stole proprietary documents, destroyed company property, and has made defamatory statements about my client. Your client tried to murder her. Caleb's voice cut through the legal formality. Carson's gavel cracked. Mr. Rourke, you are not a party to these proceedings. He is my investigator, Hackett said quickly, and a witness to events relevant to this matter. Then he may testify when called. Until then, he will be silent. Carson looked at Whitmore. Continue, Counselor. The charges are documented and supported by affidavits from company employees who witnessed Miss Chen's theft. We ask that she be remanded to custody pending trial. Miss Chen is in federal custody, Hackett countered. She is under witness protection because there have been multiple attempts on her life by individuals connected to your client. I have testimony from Mr. Rourke, physical evidence including a burned cabin and documented attacks, and 17 additional witnesses who can speak to the Pacific Labor Company's pattern of silencing critics through violence. Alleged violence, Whitmore said smoothly, based on uncorroborated testimony from biased witnesses. I have corroboration. Hackett pulled out the affidavits Lin Hua had gathered. 17 separate statements, each detailing abuse, fraud, and in several cases, deaths that were covered up to avoid legal liability, all involving the Pacific Labor Company. Whitmore's confidence flickered. Your Honor, these documents are inadmissible in this proceeding. They're evidence of a pattern, Hackett interrupted, which speaks directly to the credibility of the charges against Miss Chen. If the company has a history of manufacturing cases against people who threaten their operations, then these charges deserve heightened scrutiny. Carson took the affidavits, read through them slowly. The room was silent except for the scratch of his clerk's pen recording everything. Outside, Caleb could hear the crowd that had gathered. Workers, curious citizens, reporters. Word had spread that something important was happening. Mr. Whitmore, Carson said finally, does your client, Mr. Morrison, wish to testify in support of these charges? Mr. Morrison is not available at this time. Not available or not willing. Carson's voice had an edge now. Because if these charges are legitimate, I would expect the alleged victim of this theft to present himself for questioning. There are security concerns. There are security concerns for Miss Chen as well, which is why we're conducting this hearing in a federal building surrounded by armed marshals. Carson set the affidavits aside. I'm ordering Mr. Morrison to appear before this court within 2 hours to provide testimony under oath. Failure to appear will result in the charges being dismissed with prejudice. Whitmore's face went pale. Your Honor, that's reasonable and appropriate. This hearing is recessed until Mr. Morrison presents himself. The gavel came down hard. Court will reconvene at noon. As people filed out, Caleb caught Whitmore making a beeline for the door. The lawyer was already pulling out a pocket watch, calculating times, probably planning how to get word to Morrison that his comfortable distance from the proceedings had just evaporated. Hackett was grinning like a man who'd just won a long bet. Carson's smart. He can see which way this is going, and he doesn't want to be on the wrong side when it breaks. Will Morrison actually show? Mei-Lin asked. He has to now. If he doesn't, the charges are dismissed and he looks guilty. If he does, I get to cross-examine him under oath. Hackett started organizing papers. Either way, we win. But Caleb wasn't so sure. Morrison was cornered, and cornered men did desperate things. He moved to the window, looking out at the crowd, at Morrison's men still positioned around the building. They were agitated now, talking among themselves, receiving new orders. Something was about to happen. He could feel it. At 11:30, a commotion outside drew everyone's attention. Through the window, Caleb saw Morrison arriving, not slinking in the back way, but walking up the front steps like he owned the building. The man looked exactly as Mei-Lin had described, tall, scarred, expensive clothes worn with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. He was flanked by more lawyers and half a dozen armed men who were clearly private security. Marshal Dawson moved to intercept them at the door. Security personnel stay outside. Morrison smiled, cold, calculating. These men are my legitimate bodyguards. I have received threats related to this case. They stay outside or you don't enter. For a moment, it looked like Morrison might push the issue. Then he shrugged and waved his men back. Wait here. This won't take long. He entered the hearing room like a man visiting a subordinate's office. Casual authority, complete certainty. His eyes found Mei Lin, and his smile widened. Miss Chen, you're looking well, considering. Mei Lin met his gaze without flinching. Mr. Morrison, surprised to see you willing to testify under oath. I have nothing to hide. We'll see. Judge Carson reconvened the hearing, and Whitmore wasted no time putting Morrison on the stand. The testimony was smooth, rehearsed, painting Mei Lin as a thief and Morrison as the aggrieved party just trying to recover stolen property. Then Hackett stood for cross-examination. Mr. Morrison, you're the head of security for the Pacific Labor Company. Is that correct? It is. And in that capacity, you're responsible for protecting company assets and personnel? Among other duties, yes. Would you say you're good at your job? Morrison's smile was thin. I would. Then perhaps you can explain how Miss Chen, a clerk in your San Francisco office, was able to steal extensive documentation over the course of 8 months without anyone noticing? She was clever, deceptive. Or perhaps the documentation was freely available because it was standard business records that she had legitimate access to as part of her job? She had limited access, limited but sufficient to see patterns of fraud and abuse, which she then documented and attempted to bring to federal authorities. Correct? Whitmore objected. Speculation, Your Honor. The witness cannot testify to Miss Chen's intent. Sustained. Rephrase, Mr. Hackett. Mr. Morrison, when did you first become aware that Miss Chen had left your employment? October 2nd, when she failed to appear for work. And what action did you take? I initiated procedures to recover company property and locate the employee. Did those procedures include hiring armed men to track her into the mountains? Morrison hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Security personnel were dispatched to locate her, yes. Security personnel? Like Mr. Keller, who offered a $1,500 bounty for her capture. I don't know what you're or like the men who attacked her in a mountain pass, beat her severely, and left her for dead? That never happened. Miss Chen's injuries are documented by a physician. Her testimony is corroborated by Mr. Rourke, who found her barely alive. Are you calling them both liars? I'm saying I had nothing to do with any attack. Hackett pulled out a document, showed it to Whitmore, then entered it into evidence. This is a telegraph message from you to an associate in Denver, dated October 15th. It reads, Chen woman must be located and silenced before she reaches federal authorities. Authorize necessary expenditure. How do you explain that? The courtroom went silent. Morrison's expression hardened. That telegraph is a forgery. It was obtained from the Denver Telegraph Office's records. Are you suggesting they forged it? I'm suggesting someone manufactured evidence. Like the evidence you're using to charge Miss Chen with theft? Whitmore was on his feet. Your Honor, this is argumentative. This is establishing a pattern, Hackett shot back. Mr. Morrison uses company resources to hunt down anyone who threatens his operations. He manufactures charges, bribes officials, and when that fails, he resorts to violence. Miss Chen is just the latest victim of a system he's built to protect criminal activity. That's a lie, Morrison's composure cracked. Everything I've done was to protect legitimate business interests. Legitimate business doesn't require murdering witnesses. I never murdered anyone. Then explain the 17 workers whose deaths were covered up. Explain the bribes to immigration officials. Explain why you're so desperate to silence one woman that you've chased her across 2 states. Morrison stood, face flushed with anger. Because she's destroying years of work. Years of building a system that actually functions in this chaos. You think American companies want to hire Chinese workers? They don't. But we provide those workers. We control them. We make sure they don't cause trouble, or make demands, or upset the social order. Without us, there's chaos. Without us... He stopped, realizing he'd said too much. The courtroom was frozen. Even Whitmore looked horrified. Judge Carson spoke into the silence, his voice cold. Mr. Morrison, did you just admit to operating a forced labor scheme? Morrison's jaw worked, trying to find words that would walk back what he'd just confessed. Finally, I admit nothing. I want my lawyer. You have your lawyer, and he's going to need reinforcements. Carson turned to Dawson. Marshal, place Mr. Morrison under arrest. Charges to include conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder pending further investigation. Morrison backed away from the witness stand. You can't do this. I have connections. You have the right to remain silent, Dawson said, moving forward with iron manacles. I suggest you use it. Morrison's men outside saw what was happening and moved toward the doors. But Dawson had been ready for this. Federal marshals appeared from positions around the building, rifles ready, creating a perimeter that Morrison's security couldn't breach without starting a war they'd lose. Morrison was dragged from the courtroom, still protesting, still threatening. His lawyers followed, already planning appeals and writs and procedural maneuvers that might delay but wouldn't stop what was coming. Judge Carson looked at Mei Lin. Miss Chen, the charges against you are dismissed. You are free to testify in Mr. Hackett's investigation without impediment. He paused. And may I say, your courage in coming forward is noted and appreciated. Mei Lin stood, and Caleb saw tears on her cheeks that she didn't bother to hide. Thank you, Your Honor. Outside, the crowd had grown. Word had spread about Morrison's arrest, and workers were gathering, Chinese laborers who'd spent years under the Pacific Labor Company's control, who'd been told they had no rights, no voice, no recourse. They were seeing one of their own stand up and be heard, and they were starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, the system could work for them too. Lin Hua appeared beside Mei Lin, embraced her tightly. You did it. You spoke truth to power, and power flinched. We did it, Mei Lin corrected, looking at Caleb, at Hackett, at all the people who'd helped her get this far. No one does this alone. The next weeks were a blur of testimony, investigation, and revelation. Hackett's case expanded as more witnesses came forward, emboldened by Morrison's arrest. The Pacific Labor Company tried to distance itself from Morrison, claiming he'd acted without authorization, but the evidence was too clear, too damning. The company's directors were charged, assets were frozen, and workers were released from fraudulent contracts. It wasn't perfect. Some of the powerful men involved escaped prosecution through political connections. Some evidence disappeared before it could be secured. Some witnesses were intimidated into silence despite protections. But it was enough. Enough to break the company's control. Enough to show that even the powerful could be held accountable when enough people refused to look away. Mei Lin testified 3 more times, to a grand jury, to a congressional committee investigating labor practices, and finally to a packed courtroom during Morrison's trial. Each time, she told her story clearly, completely, without embellishment or apology. Morrison was convicted of conspiracy and fraud. The murder charges were harder to prove. The men he'd hired had scattered, and physical evidence was scarce. But he received 20 years, which would be effectively life for a man his age. It was justice, imperfect and incomplete, but real. Through all of it, Caleb stayed. He testified when called, provided security when needed, and slowly rebuilt a life that included more than just survival and isolation. Hackett offered him a position as a federal investigator, tracking down other labor exploitation schemes across the territories. He accepted, surprised to find himself caring about causes again. 6 months after Morrison's conviction, Caleb and Mei Lin stood in front of a different judge, in a different courtroom, for a different purpose. Do you, Caleb Rourke, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? He looked at Mei Lin, at this woman who'd crossed an ocean on the strength of a promise, who'd survived being hunted and beaten and left for dead, who'd stood in front of judges and juries and powerful men and refused to be silent. I do. And do you, Mei Lin Chen, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? She smiled, not the fierce, determined expression she wore in courtrooms, but something softer, more genuine. I do. They were married in a simple ceremony, witnessed by Lin Hua and Fletcher and a handful of workers whose lives had changed because one woman had been willing to fight. No grand celebration, no elaborate plans, just 2 people choosing each other after everything that had tried to tear them apart. Afterward, walking through Denver's streets with Titan trotting beside them, Mei Lin spoke quietly. I crossed the world with nothing, just hope and a promise from a stranger. And now? Caleb asked. Now I have more than I ever imagined. Not wealth or safety or even justice, really. She took his hand. But I have belonging, a place where I'm not invisible, where my voice matters. And I have someone who stands beside me, not behind me or in front of me, but beside me. Caleb squeezed her hand. That goes both ways. They walked on through the city that had almost killed them, past the federal building where they'd fought for truth, past the courthouse where justice had been served imperfectly but genuinely. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors that promised tomorrow. There would be more fights, more men like Morrison who believed power exempted them from consequences, more systems designed to crush people who couldn't defend themselves. But there would also be more people like Mei Lin who refused to stay silent, more people like Caleb who learned that causes were worth fighting for when they involved actual human beings rather than abstract principles. More people who understood that justice wasn't something handed down from above, but something built from below through stubbornness and courage and the refusal to accept that some people didn't matter. The fight wasn't over. It never really ended. But standing here, hand in hand with someone who'd chosen to fight beside him, Caleb thought maybe that was okay. Maybe the point wasn't to win every battle, but to keep fighting the ones that mattered, to stand with people who needed standing with, to refuse the comfortable lie that injustice was someone else's problem. "What are you thinking?" Mei Lin asked. "That I'm glad you answered my letter." She laughed, the sound bright and unexpected. "That drunk, lonely letter from a man hiding in the mountains? That's the one. I almost didn't. It seemed reckless, crossing an ocean to marry a stranger." She looked at him. "But then I thought, what's the alternative? Stay safe and silent, let fear decide my life." And look how that turned out. I was beaten, hunted, arrested, and nearly killed multiple times. See? Terrible decision. The worst. She leaned against him. "I'd do it again." "Me too." They walked home through the gathering dusk, two people who'd found each other through circumstances that should have destroyed them, but had instead forged something stronger than either had been alone. Behind them, the city continued its evening rhythms, people working, living, struggling, surviving. And somewhere in those streets, another person was probably gathering courage to speak truth to power, to refuse silence, to believe that their voice mattered even when everything suggested otherwise. The fight would continue. The struggle would go on. But it would go on with two more people who'd learned that standing together was better than surviving alone. That justice, however imperfect, was worth fighting for. That crossing oceans and mountains and every other barrier was worthwhile when it led to belonging. Not to safety, not to comfort, but to a place where you could stand, voice raised, and know that someone stood with you. That was enough. That was everything.